This episode of The Reality Check is brought to you by HelloFresh. Forget takeout. HelloFresh delivers all the ingredients for delicious, healthy meals anyone can prepare at home in less than 30 minutes. And HelloFresh is giving our Canadian checkers 50% off their first order. Go to hellofresh.ca and use promo code REALITY50 to get 50% off your first order. That's hellofresh.ca, promo code REALITY50. This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for September 12th, 2017, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hello.
And producer Pat.
Hi everyone.
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to explore whether you should boil hot or cold water. Scintillating, I know. Then Adam is going to look into why Cuba has so many classic cars. But first, Cristina, are Goop's days numbered?
Well, as regular TRC listeners may know, I've done a few segments on Gwyneth Paltrow's aptly named lifestyle brand, Goop. Launched in 2008, Goop claims to be a, quote, modern lifestyle brand offering cutting-edge wellness advice from doctors and experts, among other highly priced things that they sell on the website. The site peddles wellness in every form, from absurd detoxes and cleanses to vaginal steaming, which I've covered on the show, and more recently, a $60 pack of biofrequency healing stickers. You guys may remember I posted a video on TRC's Facebook page of Stephen Colbert hilariously taking them to task on that one. The reality is, Paltrow has built a digital empire on pseudo-scientific nonsense. Now, typically, I'm doing a facepalm anytime I see something come up on my newsfeed about Goop, but a couple of weeks ago, something wonderful happened. A nonprofit called Truth in Advertising, or TINA for short, had conducted an investigation into Paltrow's site, and they filed a complaint with two California district attorneys claiming that the public platform is making inappropriate health claims and using deceptive marketing tactics. Now, a little background on TINA from the About section on their website. Truth in Advertising, Inc., tina.org, is a nonprofit organization based in Madison, Connecticut, whose mission is to be the go-to online resource dedicated to empowering consumers to protect themselves and one another against false advertising and deceptive marketing. We aim to achieve our mission through investigative journalism, education, advocacy, and the promotion of truth in advertising. We are independently funded and do not accept any advertising dollars to support our work. So their goal in filing the complaint is to shine enough of a light on Goop's erroneous and negligent claims that lawmakers either shut them down or at least put enough pressure on Goop to edit its content. Freelance writer Faith Brar did a great overview piece in Shape magazine about it, which I linked to in the show notes. I also linked to the original TINA letter, but here's an excerpt. TINA.org has cataloged a sampling of more than 50 instances in which the company, as in Goop, claims either expressly or implicitly that its products or third-party products that it promotes can treat, cure, prevent, alleviate the symptoms of, or reduce the risk of developing a number of ailments ranging from depression, anxiety, and insomnia to infertility, uterine prolapse, and arthritis, just to name a few, end quote. Now, TINA mentions in the letter that they contacted the company, as in Goop, on August 11th with regard to their findings of inappropriate health claims and asked that they remedy the deceptive marketing immediately. They communicated with Goop's outside counsel on August 17th, providing a list of web pages containing unsubstantiated health claims, giving the company an opportunity to update the claims on their site. But since Goop only made limited changes to the info, TINA moved forward with filing an official complaint with the lawmakers. Their complaint letter dated August 22nd cites various examples, including Goop's carmelian crystals, which, quote, treat infertility, in addition to easing period cramps, tempering PMS, regulating menstrual cycles. And then, the infamous Goop's jade eggs, a $66 porous jade rock that women are instructed to put in their vaginas, claiming it can prevent uterine prolapse, increase chi, orgasms, among other things. In a response statement provided to various media outlets, including E! News and The Hollywood Reporter, Goop said, "While we believe that Truth in Advertising's description of our interactions is misleading and their claims unsubstantiated and unfounded, we will continue to evaluate our products and our content and make those improvements that we believe are reasonable and necessary in the interests of our community of users." Just to put community of users in perspective, there were 1.8 million unique U.S. visitors hitting the Goop website this past June.
Wow.
According to analytics service ComScore. So that's a pretty big community.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's keep in mind this is coming from the same people that said their healing stickers were a crystalline carbonized radio frequency material made from spacesuits because, guys, human bodies operate at an ideal energetic frequency. But everyday stresses and anxiety can throw off our internal balance, depleting our energy reserves and weakening our immune systems.
Some of that is true, maybe.
A lot of leftover spacesuits, I assume.
Yeah. For the record, NASA straight up called Paltrow out on this because Goop originally claimed that the materials were made from NASA issues, so they removed that part from the description. Ray Paoletta, space writer at Gizmodo, did a great article last week, and I just want to read you this paragraph from it. Last week, Gwyneth Paltrow went on Sofia Amoroso's Girl Boss Radio and addressed her company's critics by implying they were sexist and ignorant about her products. I wish that people would actually read the article or do their homework before they are vitriolic about it, Paltrow said. A lot of times they're not even addressing what's on the website, especially because we encourage discussion and we love the back and forth, and we love different points of view. Paoletta goes on to say, "It's worth noting that after her appearance on Girl Boss Radio, I started asking questions on Twitter about why Goop and Paltrow peddled pseudoscience. I was promptly blocked by the brand. So much for loving the back and forth." Now, I've mentioned San Francisco-based OBGYN Dr. Jen Gunter a few times on the show. I'm a big fan, and she regularly debunks Goop's unfounded medical claims on her blog, Wielding the Lasso of Truth. She had this to say to Gizmodo when asked for a statement about Paltrow's homework comment. "That's f***ing bullshit, and you can quote me on that."
So what does she really think?
Yeah. I've said it before, I have nothing personal against Paltrow. I don't know anything about her other than she's an Oscar-winning actor and she was awesome in the Royal Tenenbaums.
Middling in the Iron Man series.
But I'm hoping this complaint can help put an end to some of the dangerous nonsense they promote that really stoke women's health fears. At the very least, I'm seeing a lot more public criticism and backlash against the site. Hopefully that's going to help educate more people or at least force the company to stop making unsubstantiated claims. Unfortunately, as I say this, Goop is readying to release its first quarterly print magazine on September 19th. So get your Twitter fingers in top tweet and shape checkers. We're going to need you. Oof. Now, Gunter summarizes it very nicely in Gizmodo. There's this idea Goop is branded or marketed as empowerment or advocacy. My point, and many people's point, is that you can't be empowered with inaccurate information.
Well said.
Now, I just want to quickly give a shout out and congrats to another one of my fave debunkers, Tim Caulfield, a professor of law at the U of Alberta and Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy. He's the author of the book, Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything When Celebrity Culture and Science Clash? Now, Caulfield is hosting a new 6-part documentary series called A User's Guide to Cheating Death. It premieres on Vision TV Monday, September 18th at 9 p.m. ET. And one of the episodes features his friend, Dr. Gunter, covering 2 Goop-endorsed practices, colonics and vaginal steaming. So I had a little back and forth with him on Twitter, and I'm hoping he'll have the time to join us on the podcast in the near future.
Well, hopefully all this added press will make Gwyneth Paltrow feel like she's in hot water. But should you use hot water or cold water when you're boiling some water? Whenever I go to boil some water, I often use cold water. Because I was raised to use cold water, but I can no longer remember the reason my parents gave if they ever gave me one. Quick question for the panelists. Do you use hot water or cold water when you're boiling water? And have you heard you should use one or the other?
I always use cold water. There must be a reason, and my girlfriend tells me I should just use hot water. So maybe she's right. We'll see.
Christina?
I use cold water as well, and I don't really know why. I just feel I learned at some point that was the right thing to do to boil water, was to start with cold water.
So cold water for me too, and I have no explanation as for why.
And if I think about it for a second, a lot of recipes when you have to make pasta and stuff say boil cold water as well.
Interesting. So we all pretty much think we should use cold water, and none of us really know why. Such is the nature of most beliefs people have, including our skeptical show. It seems there are two main reasons people talk about hot versus cold water. One is health quality, and the other is speed of boiling.
Oh.
Let's look at health quality first and try to answer whether hot water is bad for you. Seems Chad Skelton at the Vancouver Sun had the same question years ago and did some digging. After not finding enough rigor in the online discussion, he asked Metro Vancouver, which provides water to most of the 2 million residents in the Vancouver region. Bob Jones, their water quality expert, said, quote, generally, I would say it's better to use cold water and heat it up because the cold water is fresher from the supply. Hot water can reside for extended periods either in a hot water tank or in the hot water recirculation system in the case of an apartment building or condominium. Since, Metro Vancouver, water is soft, it leaches metals, copper is mainly at play here, from plumbing systems, and this is especially relevant in buildings with recirculating loops. Metro's water treatment program includes pH and alkalinity adjustment aimed at reducing the level of copper leaching. Also, we've heard anecdotally that some buildings may actually treat their hot water to reduce the leaching. I'm not aware of any instances where chemical contamination has occurred from the water sitting in the hot water system, but since water does contain a small amount of sediment, it has been known to accumulate in hot water tanks, and most tank manufacturers recommend periodic flushing of the sediment from the tank by opening the valve at the bottom. It's likely that not many homeowners follow that advice.
I can't say I've ever done it.
Right. So this seems to indicate it's better to use cold water. Another reason is lead. Quoting and paraphrasing the New York Times, also these notes are available at trcpodcast.com. Although lead is rarely found in source water, it can enter into water through corroded plumbing. And this is worse because hot water dissolves contaminants more quickly than cold water. Yeah. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, says that older homes are more likely to have lead pipes and fixtures, but that even newer plumbing advertising as lead-free can still contain as much as 8% lead. This is concerning because lead can damage the brain and nervous system, especially in young children. To offer further support, I looked at the CDC, and that aligns with the EPA. Quote, in all situations, drink or cook only with water that comes out of the tap cold. Water that comes out of the tap warm or hot can contain much higher levels of lead. Boiling this water will not reduce the amount of lead in your water. End quote.
Yeah.
In fact, it could increase because there would be less water as some water which becomes vapor is boiled off. Ratio changes. Actually, I covered this on a different show. That seems pretty clear. Don't use warm water for health reasons. Now, what about speed? Does cold water or hot water boil faster? You probably won't be surprised to hear me tell you that cold water does not boil faster than warm water. I liked how the FitDay website sourced that to the University of Illinois Physics Department Q&A just to be safe.
Okay.
Warmer water boils faster. Just to be thorough, though, I'll also cite Scientific American, who asked Takamasa Takahashi, a physicist, and he said, quote, cold water does not boil faster than hot water. The rate of heating of a liquid depends on the magnitude of the temperature difference between the liquid and its surroundings, and the flame on the stove, for instance. As a result, cold water will be absorbing heat faster while it is still cold. Once it gets up to the temperature of hot water, the heating rate slows down, and from there it takes just as long to bring it to a boil as the water that was hot to begin with. Because it takes cold water some time to reach the temperature of hot water, cold water clearly takes longer to boil than hot water does, for those who needed that explanation.
So maybe that's like the seed of where people get that idea. The rate of change is faster when it's colder, but it still kind of catches up and then goes at the same speed.
Yes, overall taking longer. Well, now that seems to wrap everything up. But wait, there is a third claim I stumbled upon, that hot water freezes faster than cold water.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
How could this be? One explanation is that hot water evaporates much more quickly than cold water, so there'd be less of it, and this smaller amount would freeze more quickly. That seems to make some sense.
Just put less in your ice cube tray.
Well, there you go.
Come on.
The New York Times, and a different short article that I mentioned from the one above, says, quote, that phenomenon was described as far back as 350 BC by Aristotle. The phenomenon is now known as the Mpemba effect, named after Arasto B. Mpemba, a student who noticed it in 1963 while using boiled milk to make ice cream and reintroduced the concept to the scientific literature. So is this true, though? Back to Scientific American and Takamasa Takahashi, who says that isn't typically the case, but it can occur. Quote, "It all depends on how fast the cooling occurs, and it turns out that hot water will not freeze before cold water, but will freeze before lukewarm water. Water at 100 degrees Celsius, for example, will freeze before water warmer than 60 degrees Celsius, but not before water cooler than 60 degrees Celsius."
Okay.
This phenomenon is particularly evident when the surface area that cools by rapid evaporation is large compared with the amount of water involved, such as when you wash a car with hot water on a cold winter day. There's a physics reference if you'd like. I won't get into the chemistry too much, but Takahashi says that when water is hotter than about 80 degrees Celsius, the rate of cooling by rapid vaporization is very high because each evaporating gram draws at least 540 calories from the water left behind. This is a very large amount of heat compared with the 1 calorie per Celsius degree that is drawn from each gram of water that cools by regular thermal conduction. That makes some sense?
So it's the energy it takes to evaporate a certain volume of water that creates a larger cooling effect.
Something like that, yes. And when that droplet is evaporated, it takes a lot of energy with it. Another case where this might occur, where hot freezes faster than cold, is if you put water in a pan in the freezer. If you look at the case of cold water, the bottom of the tray would cool more quickly than the top because it's closer to the freezing part of the freezer. And then this would rise as the maximum density is around 4 degrees Celsius because then it's lighter. Right? This is why ice floats in water. This has a convection current, meaning things are cycling up and down. With hot water, these convection currents may not occur, and this might lead to quicker cooling. This sounds plausible. Well, in 2016, the BBC crew for Science Alert reported on a competition run by the Royal Society of Chemistry asking scientists to explain the phenomenon. Thousands of papers were submitted, and they reported that, quote, "The commonly proposed hypothesis is that hot water evaporates more quickly, losing mass, and therefore needing to lose less heat in order to freeze. However, scientists have also demonstrated the Mpemba effect with closed containers where evaporation doesn't take place. Another theoretical speculation is that water develops convection currents and temperature gradients as it cools. A rapidly cooling glass of hot water will have greater temperature differences throughout and lose heat more quickly from the surface, whereas a uniform cool glass of water has less of a temperature difference and there's less convection to accelerate the process. But this idea has not been entirely verified either. More recently, it seems that the differential strength of hydrogen bonds in cold and warm water might account for the effect, but then other places haven't been able to replicate it at all." So to summarize, drink cold water, use cold water to boil, even though it'll take longer, and hot water might, under some conditions, freeze faster than cold water.
But by that same logic, putting hot water in your ice cube tray could expose you to lead and other contaminants, which is generally not a great idea.
Oh no, you boil it first. I'm just kidding. But you just said the boiling doesn't work. Adam, when I was in Havana, I saw these amazing classic cars. Do you know why that is? And can you tell the rest of us?
I can, Darren. So last week I finally got around to watching the latest Fast and the Furious film, F8, The Fate of the Furious. The opening scene of the film takes place in Havana, Cuba, showcases many classic American cars. I've never been to Cuba, but wanted to know if this reflected reality, and if so, what the reason was for such a large number of older cars. Now, Darren, you mentioned you saw a lot of them in Havana. Is this something you guys have heard? Have you guys been to Cuba?
So I've never been to Cuba, but I do remember the film Buena Vista Social Club.
Mm-hmm.
And they parts of that documentary showed these wonderful old cars from the 50s.
Yeah. I've never been, but our son has recently, and so he took a lot of pictures, and he was commenting about that as well, how cool the cars were out there.
Very fun. So indeed, it seems like classic cars in Cuba is a real thing, and the reason for it is a bit like I would have expected, but I'll get into some of the details. Now, prior to the Cuban Revolution in 1959, Cuba was home to many American-made cars. The 40s and 50s were a time of great prosperity for Cuba's upper class. It's not to say it was a time of prosperity for everybody. A car ferry from Florida allowed cars and wealthy tourists to come and go to the island nation. Along with American cars, there are also some British cars there. Once Fidel Castro took power in 1959, few new American cars were allowed into the country. That year, businesses in Cuba were nationalized. Many wealthy residents fled the country, leaving their classic than simply modern cars behind. The import of foreign cars was considerably restricted, though some exceptions were made with letters of authorization to allow some people to import them. Not really fair, but that's how it is. The result was that the cars already in the country remained, and out of a lack of any more cars coming in, it became more worthwhile to maintain them than to just scrap them like we might have done here. With a similar restriction on parts, however, these cars aren't maintained in the same way a classic car might be in other countries, like classic cars in the US. People fix these cars themselves, often with mixed and matched parts. Many of the cars in today's Cuba are painted with regular house paint, for example, and one scene in the Fate and the Furious film shows a car with a boat engine inside it, though I don't know how much that particular modification reflects reality. These classic cars are popular with tourists who can get rides in them like they would a taxi. There have been recently eased state controls over the economy that have allowed for limited self-employment, so those who are lucky enough to own one of these classic cars can earn money by driving around tourists. But things are changing in Cuba. After over 50 years without a free flow of cars into the country, Cuba is finally easing restrictions on car imports. Similarly, relations between Cuba and the US are improving, making this kind of import more feasible. But a new car is an expensive prospect for the average Cuban citizen, and in this case, economics rather than a flat-out prohibition would likely be enough to keep cars from coming into the country. Some wonder what impact this might have on the classic car scene in Cuba. Well, it's a bit of a complicated issue. So why are such old cars in Cuba and not still around in the US? Well, it seems fairly evident. If something's a little old, it doesn't have much value. Only when it's very old does it kind of have value again. These days, a 10-year-old car is still drivable, but nowhere near as prestigious as a new one. A 15 to 20-year-old car, most people consider that to be an old beater. They want to just send it out to the scrap heap. But a 50 or 60-year-old car, that's a classic worth taking careful care of, trying to maintain it. By this simple logic, a classic pre-revolution car in Cuba can't really be compared to an old but not classic beater that's fit for the scrap heap. These classic cars are part of the culture of Cuba, and they may continue to be. With the loosened import rules, it may also be an opportunity to maintain these cars with better parts that can come into the country. Now, another concern is that cars might be sold to Americans now that exporting rules are loosening. This is something, again, that is mentioned in the film. Vin Diesel's character calls out a seemingly villainous character by saying that he gets other people's cars and ships them to the US. Well, wouldn't an American car collector want to pick up a Cuban classic? Here's this frozen in time place with all these classic cars. Vintage car appraiser Steve Linden thinks a problem with this is that the cars have been driven for all these years and used as daily cars. These are hardly cars still in their original state. They've been repaired and the parts they've used are swapped in and mishmashed from whatever keeps it running. The shell of the car is classic looking, but what's under the hood isn't necessarily. While such cars in good condition would sell for $15,000 to $70,000, just restoring them would cost $40,000 to $80,000. Simply put, these aren't worth the cost of restoring. They just wouldn't get that money back. As Jonathan Klinger, a spokesperson for the collector car insurance company Haggerty, puts it, the greatest cars would have left the country, though not through the US years ago, with the remaining cars not being worth all that much. Rumors of exotic sports cars abandoned by their wealthy owners persist, but these aren't really something that anyone's seen. What most people are driving around were cars that were common in the 50s, which aren't worth the cost of restoring. So Cuba is full of classic cars, which makes for a lovely aesthetic and makes the country look at times frozen in time. The effort and ingenuity that has gone into keeping them running is truly tremendous, and each car comes with its own history and stories about where it comes from and what it's gone through. As Cuban restrictions on importing and exporting vehicles loosen, the future of these cars is unknown, though it seems there is likely little incentive to have them exported to US car collectors. Will this piece of unique Cuban culture live on for years to come? Perhaps that is something that only time will tell.
When I visited, it felt like a place sort of frozen in time.
Yeah.
That just can't last. Well, thank you, Adam. And thanks for joining us once again, listeners. Cristina showed us that Goop might actually have to change their ways, but probably not. I explored the wonderful, scintillating realm of boiling water, hot or cold, and showed you cold water is where it's at for health, but not speed reasons. And Adam looked into the fact that Cuba has classic cars, and it sure does. But for a rationale, it's because the country was nationalized, they didn't have foreign imports, and now it might just be due to expense of the cars and the local market not being sufficiently high. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, Cuboids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Good night, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Thanks. Where could those show notes be found, Cristina?
Well, they could be found at trcpodcast.com, Adam.
That's a great website.
That's a great website.
So is this true? There's some weird dog attack or vampire attack happening outside. Just a second.
Is a dog attacking a vampire?
Probably the other way around.
Hello there, podcast listeners. This is Professor Buzzkill. We do a weekly romp through some of the history myths that are most deeply embedded in modern culture. We bust those myths, but also show why the history surrounding them is so important. Expert historians come to the Buzzkill Institute to help us in our labors, and we often interview specialists at universities around the world. And we have fun destroying quotes dubiously attributed to Churchill, Gandhi, and many others. Listen to Professor Buzzkill on the Antica Network and become the smartest person around.